Zara's claws scraped against the metal bars as she pressed her face between them, watching the endless stream of creatures moving through the dark market's main corridor. The Vorthak slavers had thrown her into this cage 3 rotations ago, and the stench of fear and despair hung thick in the recycled air. Around her, dozens of other cages held beings from across the galaxy, all waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. The dark market existed in the lawless void between star systems, a massive space station where the galaxy's most vile criminals conducted their business. Here, sentient beings were traded like cargo, their lives worth nothing more than the credits they could generate for their new owners. The Galactic Council pretended it didn't exist, too afraid of the criminal syndicates that ran it to take action. Zara belonged to the Corellian species, known throughout the galaxy for their exceptional telepathic abilities. Her people could communicate across vast distances through thought alone, making them incredibly valuable as living communication devices. The Vorthak had raided her homeworld specifically to capture telepaths, killing anyone who resisted and dragging the survivors here to be sold. She had tried to reach out with her mind countless times since her capture, sending desperate thoughts into the void, hoping anyone might hear her plea for help. The Galactic Council had protocols for rescue operations, but they were slow, bureaucratic, and rarely acted without overwhelming evidence. By the time they decided to investigate, she and the others would be scattered across the galaxy, lost forever in the slave trade. The Vorthak guard, a hulking reptilian creature with yellow eyes and scarred hide, approached her cage with a neural dampener in his clawed hands. These devices were standard equipment in the slave trade, designed to suppress telepathic abilities and make escape impossible. Zara had watched them attach the dampeners to other telepaths, seeing the light fade from their eyes as their mental gifts were severed. She pressed herself against the back of the cage as the guard fumbled with the lock, his thick fingers struggling with the mechanism. This was her last chance. Once the dampener was attached, she would be just another piece of merchandise, her telepathic voice silenced forever. With all the strength she could muster, Zara sent out one final, desperate mental scream into the darkness of space. Her message rocketed through the void, past merchant ships and patrol vessels, beyond the outer colonies and into the deep space shipping lanes. Most species in the galaxy had some level of psychic sensitivity, but none matched the range and clarity of Corellian telepathy. Her cry for help traveled farther than she had ever managed before. Powered by desperation and the knowledge that this might be her only chance, the message reached a lone cargo hauler drifting through the outer rim, its pilot making routine deliveries to mining stations and frontier worlds. Captain Jake Morrison was 3 days into what should have been a simple supply run when Zara's telepathic scream hit his mind like a lightning bolt. He nearly lost control of his ship, the mental anguish and terror in that voice cutting through him like a blade. Jake was human, and humans were considered something of an oddity in galactic society. They had no natural telepathic abilities, possessed average physical capabilities, and their technology was centuries behind most spacefaring civilizations. What they lacked in natural gifts, however, they made up for in sheer stubborn determination and an almost pathological refusal to abandon those in need. While other species might have dismissed the telepathic cry as someone else's problem, Jake immediately began tracing the signal back to its source. His ship's computer, a modified navigation AI he had upgraded over the years, helped him calculate the message's origin point. What he found made his blood run cold. The signal was coming from the dark market, a place no sane person would voluntarily visit. The dark market was run by a coalition of the galaxy's most dangerous criminal organizations. They had enough firepower to destroy entire fleets and the political connections to ensure that law enforcement looked the other way. Attempting a rescue there wasn't just dangerous, it was suicide. Any rational being would have reported the incident to the authorities and moved on with their life. Jake Morrison was not a rational being. He was human. He began rerouting his ship toward the dark market's coordinates, already formulating a plan that any sensible species would have rejected as impossible. His cargo hold was full of mining equipment and industrial supplies, giving him a legitimate reason to visit the station. If he could get inside and locate the source of that telepathic scream, maybe he could find a way to help. As his ship changed course, Jake opened a communication channel to the dark market's traffic control, requesting permission to dock. His hands were steady on the controls, but his mind was racing. He had no idea what he was walking into, no backup plan if things went wrong, and no guarantee that he could help even if he found the person who had sent that desperate message. What he did have was something that had served humanity well throughout their short but eventful history in galactic society, an absolute refusal to give up when someone needed help, regardless of the odds against success. Jake's cargo hauler docked at the dark market's outer ring with a metallic clang that echoed through the station's hull. The docking bay was a maze of rust and improvised repairs, illuminated by flickering lights that cast strange shadows on the walls. The air tasted of recycled oxygen mixed with industrial lubricants and something else Jake couldn't quite identify but didn't want to think about too hard. Two Nexari dock workers approached his ship, their forearms moving in perfect coordination as they began connecting fuel lines and cargo transfer equipment. The Nexari were known for their efficiency and their complete lack of moral scruples, making them perfect employees for a place like the dark market. They worked in silence, their large black eyes never meeting Jake's gaze as he descended from his ship. The station manager was a Graxian, a slug-like creature that oozed authority along with a foul-smelling secretion from its skin. It reviewed Jake's cargo manifest with obvious boredom, tentacles sliding across the datapad with practiced ease. Mining equipment and industrial supplies were common cargo here, used to outfit illegal operations throughout the Outer Rim. The Graxian stamped Jake's documentation without asking any questions, exactly as he had hoped. Jake made his way through the dark market's corridors, trying to look like just another trader conducting business. The station was larger than he had expected, with multiple levels connected by a network of lifts and walkways. Each section seemed to specialize in different types of illegal commerce. He passed weapons dealers hawking military-grade plasma rifles, drug merchants selling exotic substances from distant worlds, and information brokers trading in state secrets and blackmail material. The telepathic message had come from somewhere deeper in the station, and Jake followed his instincts through the maze of passages. His human brain might not be naturally telepathic, but something about that desperate cry had burned itself into his memory. He could feel a faint pull, like a compass needle pointing toward magnetic north, drawing him toward the source of that anguished scream. As he moved deeper into the station, the nature of the commerce around him grew darker. He began to see cages and holding cells, glimpses of sentient beings trapped behind bars or force fields. The slave markets were the dark market's most profitable enterprise, and the sight of intelligent creatures being bought and sold like livestock made Jake's stomach turn. His fists clenched involuntarily, but he forced himself to maintain the facade of a casual observer. A commotion near one of the larger auction blocks caught his attention. A group of Vorthak slavers were preparing for what appeared to be a major sale, arranging cages in rows while potential buyers examined the merchandise. Jake approached slowly, pretending to browse while actually scanning the prisoners for any sign of the being who had sent that telepathic cry. He found her in a cage near the back of the group, a pale humanoid with delicate features and silver hair that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light. Her species was unfamiliar to him, but there was something about her that resonated with the memory of that desperate telepathic scream. She sat in the corner of her cage, arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the floor with the hollow expression of someone who had given up hope. A Vorthak guard was approaching her cage with a neural dampener, the device's electronic hum audible even over the noise of the surrounding marketplace. Jake had heard about these devices from other traders, knew that they permanently severed a being's connection to their telepathic abilities. Once that thing was attached, the girl would lose whatever gift had allowed her to send that cry for help. The guard reached her cage and began fumbling with the lock, his massive claws poorly suited for delicate work. Jake knew he had only moments to act, but charging in would accomplish nothing except getting himself killed. Instead, he did what humans did best when faced with impossible odds. He improvised. Moving quickly but casually, Jake bumped into a nearby display of exotic weapons, sending several expensive energy rifles clattering to the floor. The noise attracted immediate attention from security guards and merchants alike, creating exactly the kind of distraction he needed. While everyone was focused on the commotion, Jake palmed a small device from his tool belt and tossed it toward the Vorthak guard's feet. The device was a magnetic pulse generator designed for emergency repairs on ship systems, but equally effective at disrupting electronic equipment. It activated with a barely audible whine, sending out a concentrated electromagnetic pulse that fried the neural dampener's circuits. The device sparked and died in the guard's hands, leaving him staring at the smoking remains in confusion. The guard roared in frustration and stomped away to find a replacement dampener, giving Jake a precious few minutes to work. He approached the girl's cage, kneeling down as if examining the lock mechanism while actually speaking in a low whisper that only she could hear. "I received your message," he said quietly, not looking directly at her. "I'm here to help, but I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say." The girl's head snapped up, her large violet eyes meeting his for the first time. There was a flicker of something in those eyes, hope mixed with disbelief, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone had actually answered her desperate call for help. She opened her mouth to speak, but Jake quickly shook his head. "Don't talk," he whispered. "They might be watching. Can you still use your telepathic abilities?" She nodded almost imperceptibly, and Jake felt a faint touch against his mind, like fingers made of starlight brushing against his thoughts. Her telepathic voice was weak but clear, carrying the musical quality that seemed characteristic of her species. You actually came," her mental voice whispered. "But this place is too dangerous. They'll kill you if they discover what you're trying to do." Jake smiled grimly as he pretended to examine the cage's locking mechanism. "Lady, I'm human. We specialize in doing things that are too dangerous for our own good. Now listen carefully, because we're going to get you and as many others as we can out of here, and we're going to do it tonight." The plan Jake outlined through their telepathic connection was either brilliant or completely insane, and Zara wasn't entirely sure which. He wanted her to use her telepathic abilities to coordinate with the other prisoners, while he created multiple diversions throughout the station. The goal was to cause enough chaos that the guards would be scattered and confused, giving them a window to escape. "My name is Zara," she told him through their mental link, her telepathic voice growing stronger as hope began to replace despair. "I can reach the other telepaths, but many have already been fitted with dampeners. The few who still have their abilities are weak from captivity and fear." Jake nodded while pretending to inspect another cage nearby. "We work with what we have. Can you contact any of them right now?" Zara reached out with her mind, sending gentle telepathic touches to the other prisoners in the surrounding cages. Most of the beings she contacted were too broken or drugged to respond coherently, but she found 3 other telepaths who still retained their abilities. 2 were from her own species, captured in the same raid on her homeworld, while the 3rd was a Menthari, a species known for their ability to project illusions directly into other beings' minds. "I have 3 others," she reported. "Cal and Lyra are Corellian like me. The 3rd is named Vex, and his people can create mental illusions. He says he's been waiting for a chance to use his abilities against the guards." Jake's grin was predatory as he absorbed this information. "Perfect. Here's what we're going to do." The plan that unfolded in Zara's mind was audacious in its simplicity. Jake would trigger a series of carefully timed accidents throughout the station, each one designed to draw security forces away from the slave quarters. Meanwhile, the telepaths would coordinate the other prisoners, preparing them for a mass escape attempt when the moment was right. "The key is timing," Jake explained as he moved away from her cage, maintaining the pretense of being a casual browser. "When I give the signal, Vex needs to project illusions that will confuse the remaining guards. You and the other Corellians will coordinate the prisoners, guiding them toward the emergency evacuation routes. I've memorized the station's layout from the public access terminals." Zara felt a chill of fear as she realized the magnitude of what they were attempting. "The Vorthak will hunt us down. They have ships, weapons, connections throughout the criminal underworld. Even if we escape the station, where can we go?" "Let me worry about that," Jake replied, his mental voice carrying a confidence that was somehow both reassuring and terrifying. "Humans have a saying, we'll burn that bridge when we come to it. Right now, our only focus is getting everyone off this station alive." As Jake moved through the marketplace, he began implementing the first phase of his plan. His tool belt contained a variety of devices intended for ship maintenance, but with a little creativity, they could serve other purposes. A plasma cutter became a way to weaken structural supports in the cargo bay. A gravity stabilizer, when reversed, could cause havoc with the station's artificial gravity in localized areas. The first accident occurred in the weapons section, where Jake's modified gravity stabilizer caused an entire display of antimatter grenades to float weightlessly into the air before crashing down in a spectacular display of sparks and alarms. Security teams rushed to contain what appeared to be a potentially catastrophic malfunction, leaving other sections of the station understaffed. The second incident happened 20 minutes later in the drug markets, where a carefully placed plasma cutter severed a coolant line, filling an entire corridor with freezing vapor and forcing an emergency evacuation of that section. More security teams were diverted to deal with the crisis, further thinning their numbers. Meanwhile, Zara and the other telepaths worked to prepare their fellow prisoners. The task was more difficult than she had anticipated. Many of the beings held in the slave markets had been broken by their experiences, their spirits crushed by the certainty that no rescue would ever come. Others were from species that had never heard of humans and couldn't understand why a member of such an insignificant race would risk his life for strangers. He's just one human, a captured Andromedian warrior growled through the mental link Zara had established. What can one human possibly do against the entire dark market? This is madness. Vex, the Minthari illusionist, responded with something that might have been laughter if it had been audible. I have observed humans in my travels, he projected to the group. They are not like us. Where we calculate odds and assess risks, they simply act. Where we accept limitations, they refuse to acknowledge them. It is terrifying and inspiring in equal measure. The third major incident occurred in the information markets, where Jake's sabotage caused a cascade failure in the station's computer network. Suddenly, half the security cameras went dark. Communication systems failed and automated locks throughout the facility began opening and closing randomly. The station's command center was thrown into chaos as technicians scrambled to restore order. It was then that Jake sent the mental signal Zara had been waiting for. A simple thought projected with all the determination he could muster. Now. Vex immediately began projecting a series of devastating illusions into the minds of the remaining guards. Suddenly, they found themselves seeing Galactic Council assault troops around every corner, phantom explosions that left them deaf and disoriented, and emergency alerts that didn't exist. The few security personnel still in the slave quarters abandoned their posts to respond to threats that were nothing more than projected nightmares. Zara reached out with her telepathic abilities, connecting with every prisoner she could reach. The locks are opening, she projected to the group. Follow my mental voice toward the emergency evacuation routes. Stay together, help those who are injured or weak, and don't stop for anything. The mass escape began with surprising efficiency. Beings from dozens of different species poured out of their cages and holding cells, moving with purpose toward the evacuation routes Jake had identified. Some were barely able to walk after their captivity, supported by stronger prisoners who refused to leave anyone behind. Others carried makeshift weapons they had crafted from pieces of their cages, ready to fight if cornered. But as they moved through the station's corridors, Zara realized that Jake was no longer responding to her telepathic attempts to contact him. The last she had sensed from him was a grim determination mixed with something that felt uncomfortably like a farewell. With growing dread, she understood that while he had planned their escape with meticulous care, he had never intended to escape himself. Jake Morrison was going to make sure they got away, even if it cost him everything. Jake stood in the dark market's central power distribution hub, surrounded by enough explosive charges to reduce half the station to cosmic dust. He had spent the last hour placing them with methodical precision, while the chaos he had created kept security forces occupied elsewhere. The charges were connected to a dead man's switch in his hand, a simple device that would detonate everything if he released his grip or if his vital signs stopped. The freed prisoners were making good progress toward the evacuation routes, but Jake knew it wouldn't last. The station's security forces were regrouping, and it wouldn't be long before they realized what was really happening. Once they figured out that this wasn't a series of random accidents but a coordinated escape attempt, they would lock down the entire facility and hunt down every escaped prisoner. That was where Jake's final gambit came into play. He had positioned himself at the heart of the station's infrastructure, in a location that the dark market's criminal owners absolutely could not afford to lose. The power hub supplied energy to life support systems, artificial gravity, and the massive defensive weapons that protected the station from external threats. If Jake detonated his charges, he wouldn't just destroy the power grid, he would cripple the entire facility. His communication device crackled to life as the station's command center finally located him. The voice that emerged belonged to Thex Mordak, the Vorthak crime lord who owned the largest slave trading operation on the dark market. Mordak's reputation for ruthlessness was legendary throughout the criminal underworld, and the fury in his voice was palpable even through the electronic distortion. "Human," Mordak growled, the universal translator struggling to convey the full menace in his words. "You will release that detonator and surrender immediately, or I will ensure that your death lasts for days." Jake chuckled, a sound that echoed strangely in the confined space of the power hub. "Sorry, but that's not how this works. See, I've got what you might call a non-negotiable position here. You let those prisoners reach their evacuation ships and get clear of the station, or I turn your profitable little enterprise into an expanding cloud of superheated plasma." Through the security cameras, Jake could see Mordak's reaction, the crime lord's reptilian features twisted with rage as he realized the position he was in. The dark market represented billions of credits in infrastructure and decades of careful political maneuvering to keep the Galactic Council at bay. Losing it would destroy not just Mordak's operation, but the entire criminal coalition that operated the station. "You're bluffing," Mordak snarled. "No being is insane enough to destroy themselves along with everyone else on this station." Jake's grin was visible through the camera feed, and there was something in his expression that made even the hardened crime lord take a step back. "Friend, you obviously don't know much about humans. We've got a long and distinguished history of doing things that other species consider certifiably insane. Charging machine gun nests with bayonets, flying experimental aircraft that had a 90% chance of exploding, sailing across oceans in wooden boats to see what was on the other side. Suicidal stupidity in the service of others is practically our species' defining characteristic." Meanwhile, Zara and the other escaped prisoners had reached the evacuation bays, where they found something that defied all logic and reason. Somehow, Jake had not only planned their escape route, but had also arranged for transportation. 3 small but serviceable spacecraft sat in the emergency docking bay, their engines already warming up and their navigation systems programmed with coordinates for the nearest Galactic Council outpost. The ships were loaded with supplies, medical equipment, and even weapons in case they encountered pursuit. Everything had been thought of, every detail planned with the kind of meticulous care that spoke of someone who knew he wouldn't be coming along for the ride. "How did he do all this?" Lyra whispered, as she helped injured prisoners board the nearest ship. "The planning, the resources, the precise timing. It should have been impossible for one being to coordinate." Zara was wondering the same thing as she used her telepathic abilities to maintain contact with prisoners, still making their way through the station's corridors. The more she learned about what Jake had accomplished, the more impossible it seemed. He had somehow acquired detailed schematics of the station, identified the exact locations of critical systems, and positioned resources throughout the facility without anyone noticing. It was Vex who provided the answer, his mental voice tinged with something approaching awe. "I have been monitoring the station's communication systems," he projected to the group. "This human has been here before. Not physically, but his ship's computer has been quietly infiltrating their networks for weeks, gathering intelligence and preparing for exactly this scenario." The revelation hit Zara like a physical blow. Jake hadn't received her telepathic cry for help by accident. He had been monitoring the dark market's communications, looking for signs of beings in distress. Her desperate message had simply provided him with the final piece of information he needed to launch a rescue operation he had been planning for weeks. But why? She projected to Vex. Why would a human spend weeks planning a rescue mission for people he had never met? The answer came not from Vex but from Jake himself, his voice carrying clearly through the communication system as he continued his standoff with Mordak in the power hub. The crime lord was trying to negotiate, offering Jake vast sums of money, safe passage, even a partnership in the slave trading operation. Jake's response was characteristically human. "You want to know why I'm doing this?" Jake said, his voice carrying throughout the station as he hijacked the communication system. "It's simple. Where I come from, we have a saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Every being on this station is someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. They have hopes and dreams and people who love them, and you've reduced them to merchandise in your sick little marketplace." Jake's voice grew harder, carrying a steel that made even the escaped prisoners stop what they were doing to listen. "But here's the thing about humans that you criminals never seem to understand. We don't calculate odds when someone needs help. We don't weigh cost versus benefit when innocents are suffering. We just act because that's who we are, and if that makes us crazy by galactic standards, then I'm proud to be completely, certifiably insane. Back in the power hub, Jake could see through the security monitors that the last group of prisoners had reached the evacuation bay. The ships were loaded and ready to depart, but they were waiting for his signal. He knew that once they launched, Mordak would send every available ship to hunt them down. The only way to ensure their escape was to make sure the dark market couldn't pursue them. Jake looked down at the detonator in his hand, then up at the camera that was broadcasting his image throughout the station. "Attention, all escaped prisoners," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hijacked communication system. "This is your pilot speaking. You are cleared for immediate departure. Fly fast, fly safe, and remember that freedom is worth any price we pay for it." Mordak's roar of rage echoed through the station as he realized what was about to happen, but it was too late. The 3 evacuation ships launched from the dark market's docking bays, their engines burning bright against the darkness of space as they accelerated away from the criminal station. As the evacuation ships cleared the dark market's defensive perimeter, Jake prepared to trigger the explosive charges that would ensure no pursuit could follow. He had accepted his fate, knowing that his sacrifice would give nearly 200 beings a chance at freedom. But as his finger moved toward the detonator's trigger, something unexpected happened. The power hub's blast doors, which should have been sealed shut, suddenly opened with a pneumatic hiss. Through the doorway stepped not Mordak's security forces, but a figure Jake hadn't expected to see again. It was Marcus Chen, his old partner from their days running supplies to frontier colonies, wearing the distinctive blue uniform of a Galactic Council enforcement officer. "Stand down, Jake," Marcus said calmly, his hands visible and empty as he approached. "The cavalry has arrived." Jake stared at his old friend in confusion, his grip on the detonator never wavering. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing here? And what's with the fancy uniform?" Marcus smiled, the expression carrying years of shared history and mutual respect. "I've been working undercover for the Council for the past 3 years, gathering evidence on the dark market's operations. Your little rescue mission just provided the perfect distraction for my team to move in." Through the power hub's viewports, Jake could see the truth of Marcus's words. Sleek Council enforcement vessels were emerging from hyperspace, their weapon systems already locking onto the dark market's defensive platforms. The criminal station's shields flickered to life, but Jake could see that they were facing overwhelming odds. The Council had brought enough firepower to level the entire facility. "We've been tracking your ship's infiltration of their computer systems for weeks," Marcus continued as he slowly approached. "When we realized what you were planning, we decided to coordinate our raid with your rescue attempt. Those escaped prisoners you're protecting? They're now under official Council protection, with full immunity and relocation assistance." Jake felt some of the tension leave his shoulders, but he didn't release the detonator. "And what about the thousands of other slaves throughout the station? Are you just going to arrest a few crime lords and call it a victory, while leaving everyone else in cages?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "That's exactly why we need you to stand down. Your explosive charges would destroy the power grid, but they'd also kill every prisoner still being held here. We need the station intact so we can conduct a proper rescue operation." The truth of those words hit Jake like a physical blow. In his focus on ensuring the escape of Zara and the others, he had lost sight of the bigger picture. The dark market held thousands of slaves, and his explosives would doom them all to die in the vacuum of space when the station's life support failed. "But if I don't trigger these charges, Mordak's ships will pursue the evacuation vessels," Jake protested. "They'll hunt down every escaped prisoner and bring them back here." Marcus pulled out a tactical communicator and activated its holographic display. The image that appeared showed the space around the dark market, where Mordak's pursuit ships were launching from hidden bays throughout the station. But as Jake watched, Council enforcement vessels moved to intercept them, their superior firepower and coordination making short work of the criminal fleet. "Your friends are safe," Marcus assured him. "The evacuation ships are already under escort to Council space. Mordak's operation is finished, and the dark market is about to become the galaxy's largest crime scene." Jake looked down at the detonator in his hand, then back at his old friend. After a moment that seemed to stretch for eternity, he carefully set the device on a nearby console and stepped away from the explosive charges. "I hope you know what you're doing, Marcus. Trust me, Marcus replied as Council security forces began flooding into the power hub. "We've been planning this operation for years. The only difference is that your crazy rescue mission gave us the perfect cover to move in." Meanwhile, aboard the lead evacuation ship, Zara felt the moment when Jake finally released his mental grip on the detonator. The relief that flooded through her telepathic senses was overwhelming, not just from her own joy at his survival, but from the collective gratitude of every being he had helped rescue. The ship's communication system crackled to life as they received a transmission from the Council enforcement fleet. The voice that emerged belonged to Admiral Sarah Kim, the highest-ranking human officer in the Galactic Council's military forces. "Attention rescued civilians," Admiral Kim said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "This is Admiral Kim of the Council Enforcement Division. You are now under official protection of the Galactic Council. Medical teams are standing by to treat any injuries. And our diplomatic corps will work with each of you to arrange safe passage back to your home worlds or relocation to Council member worlds if return is not possible." Zara felt tears streaming down her face as the reality of their rescue finally sank in. They were free. Not just temporarily escaped, but genuinely, officially free under the protection of the galaxy's most powerful governing body. It seemed impossible that their nightmare could end so completely, but the evidence was all around her in the form of council ships and official proclamations. "There's something else you should know," Admiral Kim continued. "The human who orchestrated your rescue, Captain Jake Morrison, has been offered a full commission in the Council Enforcement Division. His actions today have exposed and dismantled one of the galaxy's largest criminal operations, and his tactical brilliance in coordinating your escape has impressed our highest command levels." The news sparked a wave of telepathic chatter among the rescued Kairalians, their mental voices overlapping in excitement and gratitude. But Zara found herself wondering if Jake would accept the commission. From what she had sensed of his personality during their brief mental contact, he seemed like someone who preferred the freedom of independent action to the constraints of military hierarchy. Her question was answered a few minutes later when Jake's voice came through the communication system, transmitted from the Dark Market's power hub where he was apparently being debriefed by Council investigators. "Thanks for the offer, Admiral," Jake said, his tone respectful but firm, "but I think I'll stick to what I do best. There are a lot of frontier worlds out there that need supplies, and someone has to make sure they get delivered safely. Besides, independent operators like me can sometimes go places and do things that official forces can't." Admiral Kim's laughter carried clearly through the communication channel. "I had a feeling you'd say that, Captain Morrison." "Very well, but know that you'll always have friends in the Council Enforcement Division, and if you ever change your mind about that commission, the offer stands." As the evacuation ships continued their journey toward Council space, Zara found herself thinking about the human who had risked everything to answer her desperate cry for help. In a galaxy where most species calculated odds and assessed risks before taking action, humans seemed to operate on an entirely different principle. They acted first and worried about consequences later, driven by an innate sense of justice that transcended rational self-interest. It was a terrifying and inspiring way to live, and Zara realized that the galaxy was a better place because humans were part of it. They might be considered primitive by some species, lacking in natural telepathic abilities or advanced technology, but they possessed something far more valuable, an unshakable conviction that doing the right thing was worth any personal cost. The rescue ships continued their journey through hyperspace, carrying their precious cargo of freed slaves toward safety and new lives. Behind them, the dark market burned as Council forces swept through its corridors, liberating thousands more prisoners and dismantling a criminal empire that had operated with impunity for decades. And somewhere in the vastness of space, Jake Morrison was already planning his next cargo run, never knowing that his actions had just become legend throughout the galaxy. 6 months after the liberation of the Dark Market, Zara stood before the Galactic Council Assembly, addressing representatives from over 300 worlds about the importance of proactive intervention against the slave trade. Her testimony, along with that of hundreds of other rescued prisoners, had already led to sweeping reforms in council policy and the establishment of a permanent task force dedicated to combating slavery throughout the galaxy. She had been offered positions with the Council's diplomatic corps, academic institutions that wanted to study Karelian telepathy, and even military organizations interested in her unique experiences. But Zara had chosen a different path, one that would have seemed impossible during her captivity in that cage on the dark market. She now worked as a coordinator for the Morrison Foundation, a humanitarian organization that Jake had established, using the substantial reward money the council had paid him for his role in exposing the dark market operation. The Foundation's mission was simple: respond to telepathic distress calls from anywhere in the galaxy and coordinate rescue operations for beings in need. The Foundation operated from a converted cargo vessel that Jake had modified extensively for their humanitarian missions. The ship carried medical facilities, legal experts, communication equipment capable of detecting telepathic transmissions across vast distances, and a small but highly trained security force recruited from various species throughout the galaxy. Jake had surprised everyone by accepting the position of the Foundation's Field Operations Director, a role that allowed him to continue his independent way of life, while also formalizing his commitment to helping others. He still made regular cargo runs, but now those runs often served as cover for intelligence gathering on criminal organizations and potential rescue targets. The partnership between Jake and Zara had proven remarkably effective. Her telepathic abilities allowed the Foundation to detect distress calls that would otherwise go unheard, while his tactical expertise and seemingly infinite capacity for improvisation made even the most impossible rescues achievable. Together, they had already liberated over 1,000 beings from various forms of captivity throughout the Outer Rim territories. Their latest mission had brought them to the Andromeda Station, a massive space habitat in the frontier regions, where reports of forced labor in the asteroid mining operations had reached the Foundation through refugee networks. Zara sat in the ship's communication center, her mind extended across thousands of kilometers of space, searching for the telepathic signatures of beings in distress. "Anything?" Jake asked as he entered the communication center, carrying 2 cups of the strong coffee that had become his trademark beverage throughout the galaxy. The human habit of consuming stimulants had puzzled many species initially, but it had spread to other cultures as they observed its effectiveness in maintaining alertness during long operations. Zara accepted the coffee gratefully, the warmth helping her maintain focus during the extended telepathic search. "I'm detecting at least 40 mines in extreme distress, all coming from the mining operations in Asteroid Cluster 7. The telepathic signatures suggest multiple species, including several children." Jake's expression darkened as he absorbed this information. The use of child labor in dangerous mining operations violated so many galactic laws that even the corrupt local authorities couldn't openly ignore it. "Any indication of how heavily guarded the operation is?" "The fear patterns suggest heavy security presence, but there's something else," Zara continued, her concentration deepening as she probed the distant mines. "Some of the adult prisoners are planning their own escape attempt. They don't know we're here, and if they act while we're still gathering intelligence, it could compromise any chance of a successful rescue." This was exactly the kind of situation that had made the Morrison Foundation's work so crucial. Throughout the galaxy, desperate beings were attempting their own rescue operations without coordination or support, often resulting in tragedy for everyone involved. The Foundation's role was to provide the resources, expertise, and coordination that could turn hopeless situations into successful liberations. "Can you make contact with the leaders of their escape plan?" Jake asked, already moving toward the ship's tactical planning center. "If we can coordinate with them, we might be able to turn their attempt into something more than a suicide mission." Zara nodded, extending her telepathic reach toward the strongest of the minds she had detected in the mining operation. Making contact with unknown telepaths was always risky, as many species had mental defenses that could be dangerous to outsiders, but it was a risk she had learned to manage through months of experience. Her mind touched that of a Servani engineer named Thok, whose people were known for their exceptional technical abilities and their fierce loyalty to family bonds. The telepathic contact was brief but informative. Thok and several other prisoners had been planning to overload the mining station's power core, creating an explosion that would destroy the facility and hopefully allow some prisoners to escape in the chaos. "It's a desperation play," Zara reported to Jake. "They know most of them won't survive, but they're willing to sacrifice themselves if it means the children might have a chance to escape. They're planning to execute their plan in 18 hours. Jake was already pulling up holographic displays of the asteroid cluster, his mind racing through the tactical possibilities. 18 hours gives us time to position our people and coordinate a proper rescue. Can you maintain contact with Thok and convince him to delay their attempt? I can try, Zara said, but he's not going to trust easily. His people have been betrayed before by false promises of rescue. This was where the Morrison Foundation's reputation had become their greatest asset. Word of their successful operations had spread throughout the galaxy's criminal underworld and victim networks alike. Criminals now knew that certain types of operations attracted the Foundation's attention, while victims knew that telepathic calls for help might actually be answered. Zara reached out to Thok again, this time projecting not just words but memories of their previous rescues. She shared the mental images of freed prisoners boarding Council protection vessels, of families reunited after years of separation, of criminal operations dismantled by coordinated efforts between the Foundation and official authorities. The response was immediate and emotional. Thok's telepathic voice carried years of suppressed hope suddenly rekindled. You're real. The stories we heard, the rumors of humans who actually respond to calls for help, we thought they were just myths to help us endure. We're real, Zara assured him, and we're already moving into position. Can you convince the others to wait for our signal before attempting their escape? If you can truly free the children, Thok replied, his mental voice firm with resolution, then we will wait. But if this is another false hope, if you fail or betray us, then we will still act. Better to die fighting than to live as slaves. Jake had been monitoring the telepathic conversation through the Foundation's new neural interface technology, a breakthrough that allowed non-telepathic species to participate in telepathic communications. Tell him we understand, Jake said. And tell him that humans have a saying, failure is not an option when children are involved. As the Foundation's ship moved into position around the asteroid cluster, Jake coordinated with their security team and the Council enforcement vessels that had responded to their call for assistance. The operation would be complex, requiring precise timing and coordination between multiple groups. But Jake had learned that complex operations often succeeded where simple ones failed, simply because enemies couldn't predict or counter every element of a multi-layered plan. The rescue began at dawn ship time, with Zara maintaining telepathic coordination between all the various elements, while Jake directed the tactical aspects from the Foundation's command center. It was dangerous, complicated work that required split-second timing and absolute trust between team members who had never worked together before. But it was also exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans seemed to thrive in. And as the operation unfolded, Zara felt the familiar surge of admiration for the species that had answered her desperate call for help in that dark cage so many months ago. Humans might not have telepathic abilities or advanced technology, but they had something equally valuable, an absolute refusal to accept that any situation was truly hopeless. As the last of the rescued prisoners was loaded onto evacuation ships and the mining operations criminal overseers were taken into Council custody, Zara realized that she had found something she had never expected when she sent that first desperate telepathic cry into the void. She had found a purpose, a calling that used her abilities in service of others who faced the same hopeless situation she had once endured. The Morrison Foundation's ship turned toward its next destination, following another telepathic distress call that had reached them from the far edge of Council space. Somewhere out there, another being was calling for help, and Zara knew that no matter how impossible the situation might seem, they would find a way to answer that call after all. They were working with humans, and humans specialized in doing the impossible.